Alrighty, it's Monday. For me, at least. For you, not so much. Or maybe. Suppose it depends on when you watch this. That's a concern for another time. And another, well, no, same place, but you know what I'm saying. Anyways, new merch, check it out. A quick thank you to the T5 peeps. Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Cat Crab Lobster, DuckMachine, Astraya the Dreamer, Mezec, Feudic Jarl, and Casper Arnholtz. Thank you very much. And on to the story. By the time FallenAngeI entered the engineering compartment, there was already a heated discussion going on. Agro had hunched over trying to remove a nano precursor canister, and the acting chief engineer was giving him a hard time about it. Listen, we need those for the ship repairs. You can't just use up everything we have. Agro curled up his tip-tail in an obscene sign, and before allowing the situation to scale into a major issue, FallenAngeI stepped in. What's the problem? He asked. Even though he had heard it was in his nature to take control of situations with small psychological tricks. Mirist, the acting chief, huffed. We need the precursor material for repairs and to make any replacement parts and or tools, and this complete fool is trying to use it all up. She pointed at Agro, who had just successfully removed the last canister. He looked up to FallenAngeI. It's what you want, boss, he said nonchalantly. FallenAngeI rubbed his temples in annoyance. Do you absolutely need everything? I only asked for enough nanomachines for an infiltration job. Agro was tapping on a tablet, not even looking up, an act of defiant. But honestly, he was just trying to keep calm. His AI assistant was forced to administer anti-PTSD drugs due to the human incident. The chemicals made his hands shake. Look, stealth nanites are not exactly standard factory templates, and I'm building and slapping together blueprints here. We don't have an advanced nanofoundry nor a CPU for ultra-precise construction. Under the best circumstances, one of these canisters can make a few trillion nanites. But in our current state, to make a few thousand stealth ones, well, it's a lot more room for error. And that obviously meant a lot more material would be used up in its construction. So a terrible attrition rate. No different than mining. For every square meter of dirt you could only get so much thorium. So there is no possibility of reserving even one canister? FallenAngeI asked with a half-hearted hope. He was no engineer, but he knew when it deferred to those that had knowledge outside his own. It was one of the reasons he was still alive, having served a few princes by now. Agro shook his head, tail slapping the deck. No. If what I read about human suits is true, we have a lot to overcome, and the information in our database is out of date by 200 cycles. With a sigh, he continued. For example, the internal structure of a human suit is on a nanoscale layer of what I can only describe as spikes. It will shred any nanites that pass by it, eventually opening a hole, but not before damaging any intrusion attempt by sheer attrition. Then the modulated electric pulse washes over the spikes, checking for damage on the surface. We'll have to make our stealth nanites make it look as if the spikes are still there. It's a nightmare, it's barbaric, but it's an ingenious design. Agro was actually impressed by the human machination. It was, in essence, a physical system, not an AI dependent. But the problem was that its simplicity was not normally encountered. Much more advanced systems were usually employed by other species, like energy fields, counter nanomachines, electronic warfare, subspatial sensors, etc. But what did the humans do? Pointy things killed nanites. If only we knew humans are such a problem, FallenAngeI commented offhandedly, dismissing the current issue. Mirist gave him a puzzled look. Oh, have you dealt with the demons before? She asked incredulously, for nobody survived those monsters, but she paused, and she had survived one, technically speaking. FallenAngeI smiled, his teeth showing slightly, tails swaying side by side. Oh, do I have stories to tell? For example, did you know that the human vengeance is not a true account of events? Their planet is devoid of life, and well, by their own hand. Feudic had her hands figuratively full at the moment, which included a ship of effectively seemed dead in space. A superior currently in the brig, a mess hall full of taxon, and a particularly pissed off human, free to move about the ship. No, and add to that the decimation of nearly the entire crew. She wanted to scream, keep on screaming until her vocal cord snapped, and then put a bullet in her skull. No one had signed up for a feck-up on this scale. No one ever signed up for feck-ups, but that was beside the point. But you did not look miracles sideways. The human had graciously enough accepted the delay and asked to use the medical facilities. It struck as a sign of weakness if the human was so injured that it needed to heal. Then she could have him killed on the operating table. But it could not be so simple, because no enemy would simply just do that. The human had some backup plan, some leverage. It was but a play against the unknown opponent. Demons, them all, who knew what tricks, nay, what horrors that they had yet to call upon. Food was an issue. Taxxon were obligate herbivores, and they also needed a specialized diet. Thankfully, Volson had convinced the prince of the merits involved in a contingency plan. Originally capturing the Taxxon would involve taking their food to keep them alive during transport, however. Should any unprecedented scenario were to play out, they had rations. They were covered for about 4 standard days at present capacity. If they gave out full rations, Beryllium had already given out an order that it was going to be half rations. Volson, that slime-tailed backstabber, had what machinations did he hold, what tricks were yet to be played. Someone like him could not be trusted for long. But, paradoxically, he could be trusted to look after his own interests. Presently, that meant survival, and he had given a sign that he could neutralize the human within 2 days. With limited choices like those, her hands were tied. Still, maybe there was something to learn out of seeing what the human would do within the medical facilities. She saw that Volson was in the engineering section, probably taking care of the preparations to incapacitate the human. It wasn't much of a leap of logic to derive the general how. The armor. Some way to cause it to lock on the user, probably unlikely in a battlefield scenario. But with extended access to it like they had, well, there was only so much that defenses could withstand. If she applied that logic, her own armor had defenses and electronic countermeasures to prevent a hack, even with heavy jamming. So that left some physical attack. Nanomachines. Nanodust storms were a rare battlefield tactic due to cost, but they could do a hell of a number on an unshielded armor. The human could not maintain the energy requirements, not to mention that it would seem overly aggressive. He had to have worked this out already. Was that the reason why he was heading for medical? To remove the armor and thus the one thing that could trap him? No, unlikely. Humans were supposed to be formidable even without armor, but surely that was just propaganda. The sort of thing that you paid the Yerkish merchant to discreetly distribute. There was, however, one solution if the situation did present itself. On her way to the medical facility, she stopped at her quarters. The room smelled. The cleaning and service spots had not gotten into it yet. No matter what she needed, it did not need to be clean. There, on her desk, was a short, thin blade. The edge just one straight length of titanium, over 1,000 years old. Barely 6 inches, but deadly all the same. What made it particularly suited for a purpose was the lack of any electromagnetic means, nor supersonic vibration. No heated edge, no gyroscopic compensator, no zero-G movement. Just a piece of metal, perfect for its dark purpose. Mezec First Class Raxalian had been given almost no warning about the demon using the medical bay. He had no prior experience with humans, and the ship was not equipped to handle major medical procedures. The proper data on human physiology was also sorely lacking, not to mention the proper drugs to comparable biochemistry. To add to that, from the report that he had skimmed over, that the human had to have some extensive trauma. It was likely to die soon. Raxalian did not care what kind of stories the old scales told. Humans were not some invincible monsters that could not be felled in battle. All living things died, and Raxalian, that was an unshakable fact. He knew the human prayers, and the demons also knew this. If it bleeds, we can kill it. He recited for himself, breaking the quiet lull after the prayer. An acting captain walked in, Berelia, and shortly after 2 Taxxon, hard to tell if juveniles or adults. They were sweeping the room with portable scanners, looking for, weapons. The room was a self-sterilizing system. A complex series of subordinate machines, filters, cleaners, and aerosols did the job. You could come in with conceivably actual soil, and the room would do its best to clean you up. He was about to shoo away the tiny beings when he heard the steps, heavy, like rolling thunder coming down the hill, threatening a gale, which would swallow you whole. He looked up at Aurelia, who, to her credit, kept her composure. He had already administered 2 doses of a sedative from his personal biomon. The demon walked in and needed to bend over in order to pass the doorway. The giant beast had arrived in Rexilian's world, and even though he was up to his eyes in combat sedative, his spear response seemed to spike. The armor had severe external battle scarring. From that alone, he could guess the occupant was not in good shape. The human spoke with a measured voice, common galactic language. It was being interpreted by the AI system to those present in different but subtle ways. So that I am clear and understood, if I die, am murdered when I remove this armor, it is set to activate a Casimir Cascade self-destruct on its microfusion core. The resulting event, spatial rupture, will destroy the ship. Warning, high-level threat message, species known for suicide and disregard of self-preservation when options removed. Rexilian saw Aurelia hide a piece of metal into her sleeve. Was that a primitive blade? Not that such questions mattered. The armor demon was leaving the protection of his suit. What came out of it was the stuff of nightmares. An inky black figure with no discernible features, as if someone had cut out a silhouette of a human on a black fabric and placed 2D representation in the sickbay. Using the room's sophisticated scanners yielded that there was a 3D mass of something in there, but it looked so wrong to biological eyes. The initial scan result collated 3 billion points of data and concluded that the light-absorbing material was present, currently absorbing 99.92% of the light in that particular space. Then, as if by the hand of an invisible puppeteer, the black surface rippled and pulsed, beginning to move with all the distinct sound of a nanomaterial changing shape, leaving in its wake a pale skin, finally revealing the human. The black mass gathered on its back and formed a solid hexagonal shape, a sort of container. The human was clearly injured. Rexilian could see the blackened skin, necrotic tissue on the abdominal area. Not a good sign, but the burns surrounding it were all wrong. Should have been 3rd degree, but it barely looked like a minor friction burn. The human walked onto the autodock table. My suit will connect and perform the procedure. You are welcome to observe. Surprisingly, to the point, not even a single language tag. From the readouts, the human skin was a mess on the affected area, but everywhere else was a work of art. The outermost layers were composed of carbon bucket tubes that responded to impacts as armored plating. With enough layers of low-velocity impacts would be completely negated. Abandon hope, all ye who punch a human to death. It was not going to happen. Curiously, there were sections of discoloration on the pectoral muscle area, but not bruising, too uniform, too complex a pattern. It took Rexilian a second to recognize it. Seemed to be subcutaneous. It was a series of glyphs. The computer analyzed it as script, several thousand years old by human standards. It read SPQR Legio I Germanica, Centurio G34. An interesting marking, perhaps a part of a ritual for the human soldier. Just under that was a series of scaffolding layers of nanites set about to repair and remove dead skin cells, but this also proved to be a filter. Contact chemicals that were harmful would not affect the human. Rexilian had been reading on a compound called fentanyl. He had been hoping to dose the human with that, but no such luck. Tiny, almost imperceptible monowires flowed along the human hairs, a collective sensor net, its capabilities unknown. Much more visible were the small bumps under the skin, subdermal plating nanoplast armor. That had taken a brunt of the damage, and yet the human was still being prepped for surgery. The human's armor closed up and took 2 steps towards the autodock. Using a hardwired connection, Rexilian was unable to send commands, only observing now. Little things jumped out as curiosities. For example, above the eyebrows, the human had 2 sets of 3 small red pips. A cursive scan revealed that they were light sensors. Speculative analysis declared that they were primitive secondary sites to augment movement detection. Behind both ears, a second set of pips was located. This would give the human situational awareness of its entire surroundings at all times. The actual human eyes had a number of augments as well, from microlight emitting LEDs to a second set of eyelids with a reflective coating. It seemed that the humans were rather alright with so much nanotechnology on their bodies, as the autodoc began cutting around specific subdermal armor and a section lit up with internal structure information. Micromachines crawled all over the insides of the human, from the nanoscale to the ant-sized. The various models and types had all specific purpose. Some were meant to stem internal bleeds, others to filter out bacterial infections. A few were tagged as counter-antagonistic systems, instruction, intrusion detection. It was a veritable army, with the explicit purpose of keeping the human fighting for as long as possible. In the subdermal layer, the human had a complex series of muscle fibers, thin strands not meant for mechanical work. The network was all over the body, and it took the computer system several minutes to determine the purpose. It was a secondary endothermic system, holding a storage of adenosine triphosphate. It could in theory be used to warm up the body in extreme temperature for some time, depending on external factors. But more importantly, it also seemed capable of moving around the ATP to other locations on a per-need basis. Truly fascinating to see. Muscle tissue analysis revealed that specifically biofibers were woven into organic tissue. Its purpose seemed to provide scaffolding and a corridor system for the larger micromachines. An outer layer of the muscle tissue was covered in a mesh of same biofiber material. It was absolutely insane to the degree to which the human was modified. Deeper scans had the machine spitting out rows upon rows of modifications and systems that Rexalian had heard of. Nanofactories in the bones, nanohives all over the body, nervous control nodes, chemical processes, etc. The list went on and on. This human was rather a hard-to-kill opponent. Example, the bones were laced with a matrix of nanopar smart matter capable of reshaping itself, so a fracture would technically be repaired in minutes. Rexalian decided to concentrate on the operation and returned his attention to the ghastly procedure. The human was cutting its intestines out to form a bypass with the mesh flex, a synthetic bioagnostic sheet used in burn victims. By wrapping it around the surviving halves of the intestine, he was performing an unsanctioned medical procedure. Well, his suit was doing it. The human had slipped into unconsciousness a few minutes prior. Then the stomach, almost completely flash cook, was cut out and bypassed. This sort of operation would mean the human could not consume proper food for a while. 3 of the 6 kidneys were removed, and the pancreas was given a shot of steroids and a cocktail of drugs that Rexalian would not have approved of in that combination. It was lethal. Necrotic tissue was being cut out and replaced with more mesh flex. The human systems of bucket tubes almost immediately started trying to extend themselves into the new areas. It seemed as if the lungs of the human could attach and detach on command, capable of draining fluids into a bladder in case of emergencies, and filled with toxin nanocarbon filter alveoli. They dumped the waste into a fast track of the intestines, and the modification was staggering. You could jump at any point in the body and find something interesting. For example, this human had symbiotic creature moving around in between the organs, but the scans could not quite catch it. Oh, what could it be? At some points it seemed to change structural composition and attach itself to organs. It was hard to get an accurate picture. So with a sigh, it was time to move on. Rexalian could probably spend the next few days going over the data. So many points of interest. For example, according to the literature, the human immune system was naturally highly adaptive. This was such from evolution alone. It had a myriad of specialized cells from a number of roles, including the elimination of cancerous cells. An immune system that was capable of killing cells of its own host. This species was truly all about death. But if this human was any indication, the species was not content with just that. The spleen was capable of producing custom phagocytes and lymphocytes with specific hunt-kill expression proteins. Coupling that with the messenger dendritic cells to distribute new blueprints to a distributed network of artificial lymph nodes, and you had an organism that was virtually impossible to get sick. What passed for a heart was just a large muscle, brutish and covered in its own version of mesh flex. A composite matrix of both nanoscale scaffolding and something close to 100 ant-sized micromachines, all checking structural integrity, performing minor adjustments and potentially repair work. Rexillian was fascinated by the level of integration of technology and organics. Very few species were willing to do something like that. On the heart itself there was a small nodule. At first the machine thought that it was a defect or a tumor, but closer inspection revealed that it was an artificial structure for the production of stem cells and the storage of the fresh supply of cardiomyocytes. That was incredible. The amount of human blood in the operating compartment of the room was staggering, but not enough to kill the subject. A cursory check revealed that the human blood was heavy with oxygen-carrying nanites, as well as a suite of repair and defensive systems. The veins and arteries would be rerouted in case of a major breach. Not a particularly fast process. It would take nearly an hour for a proper bypass, but a quick job could be performed in minutes. By estimation, this human could operate with just 10% of its full blood volume. A horrifying thought. Just built for an extended battle. Who knew how many more augmentations were hidden from view? Rexillian relaxed when the Autodoc entered a recovery mode. The human would need the next 16 hours of rest. With that, he looked at Feudic, who had grown increasingly distraught by the readings that she'd observed. "Your blade is not going to kill that demon," he told her in the coldest voice that he could muster. She merely looked at him, and with a defeated voice, she said, "Why did it have to be a human?" End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.